My name's Justin McClure, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we're talking about a favorite of me and Will's, Terry Gilliam.
Here's to the dreamers.
Or is he?
Yes. Well, Terry Gilliam, I will probably always think of as one of my favorite filmmakers.
100%. When I picked up a digital camera when I was in junior high and I started making movies, I'd be like, all right, I want to put the camera on its side. I'm going to do like this Gilliam camera shot. Like, his visual style already meant something to me.
I mean, he is one of those ideal entryway directors, at least for young boys, in the sense that he has a strong, recognizable personal style with recurring themes. His style is very energetic and weird. Off-screen, he's this, nonconformist guy. He's battling the studios, these know-nothing people who want to stifle artists.
Even as a teenager, I knew that his career was a difficult one. He couldn't get his movies off the ground. Every step of the way, he was fighting these businessmen that want to keep the artists down.
Yeah.
And that means something to a kid, right? Because it's somebody trying to put their personal vision on screen. And for me, my love for Gilliam started and was solidified with Brazil, which we should talk about first, because I think out of all of Gilliam's movies, this is the one that me and you know by heart. For a long time, it was on my second favorite movie of all time.
Yeah.
And I'm questioning myself now of when did that go away? Was it the last time I watched it? In theaters or even on DVD? I don't know, but at a certain point, maybe because I watched so many other Terry Gilliam films, it was kind of overshadowed by them in some way. Or, I just know it too well.
There was a time when I probably would have had Brazil in my top 10. Mm-hmm. And it's the ultimate articulation of the Gilliam-esque style. One of the pleasures of Gilliam, and something that I think makes him worth reckoning with and that you don't see anywhere else, is this particular vision of the future that he has, where it's like a future that is entirely made out of the compost of the past.
It's a future where everything is engineered to be as efficient as possible in the most inefficient ways.
Yes.
It's a future where all of these rules have been set up in place and no one can question them because they are rules. It can be exemplified perfectly by the fact that everyone has tiny screens in Brazil that they use giant magnifying glasses to read. That is so funny and so clever in a way to just illustrate this idea.
And, the world around him is crumbling. I mean, even in a movie like The Zero Theorem, where his style is a bit ossified and where, it's not a very good movie, but there are a couple of moments in The Zero Theorem where it's shot in some Eastern European city that's already crumbling, and all the costumes are made out of thrift store materials, and people are riding old bicycles and they have old TVs, where it's this is that Gilliam style. Nobody else gives me this. I love this.
And something like Brazil not only has that kind of dystopian angle that every teenage boy loves. Everyone goes through a phase where it's 1984, Fahrenheit 451. These are the books that speak to me because it's railing against the system. And here you have Gilliam doing that with the Mad Magazine aesthetic that he has, that the whole world is a gag, that stuff can be happening in the background. Sam Lowry, played by Jonathan Pryce, is sitting on a streetcar and all men are sitting down and there's one woman standing up and she's pregnant and she has one leg, and that's the joke of the scene.
And with the kind of George Orwell light stuff, it's he's railing against stuff capital B bureaucracy, capital F fascists, the capital P police state, and it seems very, very profound and deep when you're a kid.
Especially when you're a teenager, because you're oh man, look how crazy the real world is. And while the real world is crazy and you can rail against it, when you go further into Gilliam's filmography, it gets a little bit more difficult for him to handle and present it in an interesting way. But in Brazil, you got it all. It's way overlong. It's packed with dream sequences. The number one thing that you tell people, hey, don't include too many of those things in your movies because they are self-indulgent and they usually don't need them. But man, oh man, Terry, self-indulgent Gilliam, he loves dream sequences.
It's full of, surprising and delightful images. The sorts of images you don't see anywhere else. It's got a great cast delivering very Python-esque performances, including Michael Palin as, the protagonist's best friend.
Oh, what an amazing role as the nicest guy in the room, which Michael Palin is often considered by everybody who meets him, playing a nice guy who's also the most awful person because he's doing these terrible things, but he has a smile on his face, and in the other room he's taking care of his daughter who's playing with some blocks.
Robert De Niro's in there, you know, with a charming supporting performance, Bob Hoskins, and then it's grounded in a way that a lot of Gilliam films are not by Jonathan Pryce, who's the straight man in the center of this world.
And he is playing a selfish weenie who has these ideas of romanticism that, you know, real life can't really replicate. But at the same time, it's fun to follow him do these things. He's bad, and the movie, as he's going along, he is kind of waking up to a moral consciousness. Like, he's railing against his rich parents, but he's also falling in love with this person that maybe is or is not a terrorist. And then you have around him this constructed world, which, when I think of Gilliam, that's what I think of, this impossible space.
Now, this is something that I think we've lost with Gilliam.
100%.
Because a movie like Brazil or Time Bandits, they're so tactile. They're so, they look fake in a very charming way, you know, made out of models and rubber, a lot of smoke. And now they're, you know, CGI worlds. And also, you know, he keeps returning to this idea of this society that wants to stifle us. And so the only way out is through, like, dreaming
and imagination.
Yeah.
And, you know, throwing off the shackles of what polite society demands of you and just, you know, following your own path, which I can understand. It makes sense in some of his films, and in others, it really doesn't.
I mean, I think there are limits to that as like a political strategy.
Yes, 100%.
And also, you know, there's a weird current in his movies, not so much Brazil, but in the other ones, of like mental illness, where it's like, you know, it's that corny like K-Pax shit of like, you know, who's really crazy, society or the people who society deems mad?
I mean, you watched The Fisher King again this week, which I didn't, but I have to say that, like, when I was in my Gilliam fever, I watched The Fisher King and was very disappointed by it. Principally because everybody said it was amazing, and secondly because it did not replicate that kind of fantastical Gilliam that I love so much about Brazil. This is him trying to make a studio picture. He's trying to ground himself, and I kept waiting for it to kind of like explode in flights of fancy. Then it does very briefly. There's a famous, like, a dance sequence that takes place at
Grand Central Station.
And other than that, that's pretty much it. It's mostly Robin Williams just, you know, hamming it up against sleazy Jeff Bridges.
Well, you know, watching The Fisher King again, I did not feel like I was at a loss for Terry Gilliam's style.
There's a lot. Fisheye lenses. I specifically remember when Jeff Bridges, remember how he, a little bit to blame for the death of Robin Williams' wife, you see like crazy slow motion as someone blasts through a window.
Yeah, so the plot of this movie is that Jeff Bridges is a Howard Stern type shock jock, and he's, you know, railing against yuppies and railing against anyone. No politics, so to speak. And he is saying something about, oh yeah, these yuppies, it's them or us. And, you know, one of his crazy listeners goes up and shoots up a restaurant. A couple of years later, he finds this weird, crazy homeless man played by Robin Williams, who it turns out his wife was killed in that incident. And he feels this obligation to sort of follow him around and help him out and bring him back into society. So, you know, this is a movie that was actually quite popular when it came out.
Huge hit.
It put Gilliam's career back on track after feuding with the studios throughout the 80s. It's very baggy.
It is.
So one of the things that people, I think, rightly say about Gilliam is that he's not much of a storyteller.
Yeah. I mean, he's 100% interested in the visuals. And even someone like Eric Idle, when he was talking about Gilliam, was like, you know, Gilliam isn't really interested in emotion in his films. And while Fisher King is kind of all about that, Gilliam struggles a little bit with how to kind of direct it.
I think his movies, like, I'm not often amazed by the performances in his movies, although The Fisher King has some good ones.
Yes. Wasn't some people nominated?
Mercedes Ruehl won an Oscar for it, giving, I think, the least interesting performance in the movie, actually. I think Amanda Plummer, Robin Williams, and Jeff Bridges are all better.
Wow, she won an Oscar for it?
She won an Oscar.
Yeah. I would have thought it would have been Amanda Plummer if it was anybody.
Amanda Plummer's great in it.
She's fantastic.
But his movies, like, they don't really... The actors, it's hard to exactly follow them on their arcs because they all start at 11.
Yeah, and they just, you know, remain at 11 the entire time.
And, you know, they don't follow a clean 3-act, like they meander, you know. But I do think The Fisher King is, like, a little bit offensive, where it has all these scenes in, hospitals and mental wards, if that's the phrase I'm looking for. There are all these sort of like kooky, funny, mentally ill characters played by Michael Jeter, for instance, who are getting into shenanigans. And, the movie kind of comes on the idea that, well, actually, maybe Robin Williams is a mad genius. And if he can just conquer his old fears, if he can sort of self-actualize through the love of this woman, then, the trauma will be over.
That is a very toxic lesson to impart to an audience.
Yeah, and, all I would say is don't watch The Fisher King again, because you're going to be disappointed, I think.
But that kind of rebelling against the medical establishment can even be seen in something like Brazil, where his mother is getting all this plastic surgery and the doctor's like, we have to do this, we have to do that. Or there's the woman who's getting the acid treatment and she's essentially melting as the movie goes along.
Yeah, I like that stuff, though.
It is, and because that's a different kind of rebelling, but it's essentially the same song played a different way, right?
Yeah, well, with that one, he's kind of going to class a little bit more.
And Gilliam says that, like, that kind of distaste and distrust against these figures of authority is something that he had when he was young. He likes to say that he grew up in a very happy household. His parents were very respectful. They never fought that much. And that, we'll talk about this a little bit later. He's like, if only I had been born blind or some medical illness, somebody would care about me.
Yeah, he needs to shut up.
Yeah, about that kind of stuff. He went to art school. He worked for Harvey Kurtzman, who was one of the famous artists for Mad Magazine.
He moved to England, where he worked with some of the Pythons, Eric Idle, Michael Palin, and Terry Jones, on this children's show called Do Not Adjust Your Set, where he did animation. And then the creative team behind that show merged with Graham Chapman and John Cleese, and they created Monty Python's Flying Circus in 1969.
And everybody knows Monty Python's Flying Circus. They know the movie Monty Python's Holy Grail, which, if you are a Patreon subscriber, we talk about it this week on our Patreon episode. You can become a Patreon subscriber by going to patreon.com/theimportantcinemaclub. If you want to hear two bespectacled white nerds that are also male talk about Monty Python's Holy Grail for the 1000th time in your life, we have lots of insights. But I think that we should jump to when he actually directed his first feature film solo, which was Jabberwocky.
And this was kind of a follow-up to Monty Python, The Holy Grail, also set in the Middle Ages.
But Terry Gilliam wanted it to be a opposite to Monty Python's Holy Grail. Like, he liked to talk about that, where Monty Python's Holy Grail was very sketch-based and had, humor all over the place. He wanted something that was more story-based, which is ridiculous if you watch Jabberwocky.
I think it has less of a story than Holy Grail does, if possible.
But he wanted a different aesthetic, even though it is in the same medieval setting. And I think that what you see in Jabberwocky, which actually stars a Python, Michael Palin, the nicest man in the room, is that Gilliam was all about the grit and grime in Holy Grail, because whoa boy, is it all over Jabberwocky.
Yeah, you can definitely see what he brought and what Terry Jones brought to Holy Grail, because Jabberwocky is not very funny.
I didn't like it that much when I was a kid, because I was like, well, this is not like Holy Grail, and it's not like Brazil. Like, what is this middle thing that I'm getting?
I had the exact same feeling, in fact. But, watching it now, older and wiser, I still found it a bit of a difficult experience, but I enjoyed the experience.
I loved it this time, especially watching Criterion's new transfer, where it's just it's so textured, there's smoke everywhere, and mud, and because Gilliam said that he didn't have that much money or time, everything is shot in these beautifully framed wide shots where the comedy just plays out a little bit longer than it should, and everyone is grimy and gross and coughing and farting.
And he's very influenced by Bosch and Bruegel, so the movie looks like one of their paintings, just full of filth and grime.
But at the same time, Gilliam is still tapping into that kind of Mad Magazine energy. It was actually co-written with somebody who was a gag artist for Mad Magazine. So you'll have this grit and grime punctured by a knight flying through the air and landing with his legs splayed in the mud.
And he still has some of the sensibility of Python, and certainly some of the same view of class that Python has. So it's a world where, there are two classes. There are the peasants who are living in just squalor and disgust, and there are the royalty who live in luxury but are also
miserable and gross looking.
Yeah.
The king is this frail, tiny little man who gets covered in this giant sheet, so he's like a peanut wrapped up in a blanket.
I mean, as they mentioned in interviews, films like Camelot that were coming out at this time made the Middle Ages look so glamorous. But, people were not washing in the Middle Ages. People didn't have electricity in the Middle Ages.
But I think what's important about Jabberwocky is that it is grounded in the same way that Brazil is by a kind of lame, silly, but essentially good figure, in the case of Jabberwocky, Michael Palin.
Well, it introduces a theme that Gilliam would develop in later movies where Palin is this young peasant boy whose father is a carpenter, and Palin is very sort of business oriented.
Mm-hmm. He just wants to be an accountant.
yeah. But he is kind of a nice guy, and the whole story is this lame, unremarkable doofus being thrown through all these extraordinary situations when all he wants is just to have a modest life.
Yeah, the film famously ends with him becoming a hero, getting half the kingdom and the princess, and Michael Palin is just horrified by all this because he just wants the girl next door who treats him like garbage.
And this is not a perspective that Terry Gilliam shares, I think.
Oh, you don't think so?
I mean, I don't think Terry Gilliam wants to be a mild accountant.
No, I don't think so either. I think he finds humor in that, but he also finds humor in the fact that, this protagonist cannot get what he wants, even though that it's so low on the totem pole. Mm-hmm. But I think that, the comedy in this film, it's my favorite kind of Gilliam comedy, that it's so horrifying. There's a scene where Michael Palin bumps into a man who's begging for money and who's chopped off his own foot.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, I just got this great idea. I chopped off my own foot and then people give me more money. And he's like, maybe we could both chop off our feet. Then we could probably get double.
It's such a dense experience. Mm-hmm. There's so much happening in the frame, so much to look at, so many characters, and they're all the characters are prickly and eccentric.
Mm-hmm. Or difficult or covered in gore.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the movie, it just gives what, male teenager wants, which is over-the-top violence and a giant monster that's a big rubbery suit.
It has that handcrafted quality.
I actually, watching it this time, I remember as a kid finding the Jabberwocky looked really goofy with it because it has, big, floppy feet. Mm-hmm. But the design of it and its rotten wings and its red eyes and the way that it's framed as forced perspectives to look really big, I found really endearing and tactile in a way that Gilliam obviously hasn't touched in 2 decades. And this kind of fantastical feel of Jabberwocky, this medieval thing, is something that, Gilliam would only really play with in his earlier, funnier films. Because then after Jabberwocky, you have Time Bandits, which wasn't a big part of my youth. It wasn't a big Gilliam film in my imagination. I think it just came to it too late, and Brazil dominated so much.
I certainly liked it as a kid. And, it has a lot of things that I miss from Terry Gilliam. It's also grounded with this boy who's the audience surrogate. We're missing a character like that in recent Gilliam films, and it takes time to just have a little bit of awe and wonder in its world.
This is kind of amazing what you're seeing, and that extends to the film that would come to define Terry Gilliam's working career, which is The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, which was famously a horrifying production. There's a book written about it. There's a documentary on the DVD. The fact that the producer was promising stuff. They were in Italy. The production was so big. They were moving so slow. It went over budget.
It went over budget before they even started rolling.
Yeah, it was just madness. But the final film, which I rewatched this week, is amazing. It has everything that I love about Terry Gilliam. And watching it now, it actually has some weird meta commentary that I don't think that he intended at the time. The fact that it's like all of Gilliam films about somebody telling a story and the layers between imagination and reality. But it's this Baron Munchausen is portrayed as this very old man that when he goes on these adventures, he suddenly feels young again. And at one point in the film, he's like, we can't do this anymore. It's too much. We can't go on these adventures. We're old. And I realize that, I'm stretching here, but his team is actually the exact members of the Monty Python team as well. So you could even watch it as a metaphor for Python themselves, where they're like, listen, we can't do this anymore. We can't do this fantastical stuff because that's what we did when we were young. We have to move on and realize it can't happen.
Well, Gilliam keeps returning to this figure of the dreamer who is an outcast of society and who is not appreciated by society. And, if I've been a little disenchanted from Gilliam in recent years, part of it is that I keep seeing a lot of there's something self-aggrandizing about this archetype he keeps returning to. It's we know that with Brazil and with Munchausen, those were the two movies where he was very famously battling studio executives. He did it again with Harvey Weinstein, famously, on The Brothers Grimm. Parnassus has this sort of character. The Man Who Killed Don Quixote has this character. And it's like, I don't know, there's something a bit like he's flattering himself.
Yeah, I think that like Baron Munchausen, though, it hits that perfect balance where the Baron can be charming and a hero, but he also has foibles and is kind of lame, and it shows that he can be mean. And you have this grounding character in Sarah Polley as this person that wants to protect her family, who's currently under siege in the film, and she's like, listen, we have to do this adventure. We have to keep moving. And because she's there, that kind of centers the entire picture, that you can have these crazy wild characters, but they're out of control, and you need somebody to help them and to get to the next level. And the movie is actually kind of moving in that way when you have those contrasts. But as Gilliam goes on in his career, he loses that Sarah Polley character to give things a context. Because like when you're watching something like Tideland, which was Gilliam's return to like indie, like I'm going to do it all my own way, you realize the limits there is when he can't imbue the screen with this fantastical vision.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a movie where there's kind of no point of entry for me.
Oh, man, how excited was I for that movie? I was like rubbing my hands together.
Now we're going to see the pure Gilliam. After Harvey Weinstein has kept him down, he's going to rise from the ashes.
And the premise seems so like pure Gilliam as well, which is a girl left on her own, having to, survive basically by her imagination and her imagination alone. But what you get in this movie, and you get in most of Gilliam's later day films, is that there's no way to illustrate this imagination, so you're just left with this character kind of trying to act it out. And unfortunately in this film, it's done in a very thick Southern accent, and you really feel like you're trapped with a little girl doing a bunch of voices for 2 agonizing hours.
When I think about Gilliam, I'm reminded of what Rossini said about Wagner. He said, he has lovely moments and brutal quarter hours. There are so many scenes, especially in the later Gilliam movies, where it's like a medium shot with a fisheye lens, and there's somebody in the middle of the frame, and they're mugging up a storm, and there's all this visual information around them, and it's too much for your eyes to digest, and the scene goes on and on and on and on and on, and they're hitting the same note.
I think that Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is the perfect transitional movie for Gilliam, because that movie, even when I was a kid and I watched it, that first half hour is nuts. It's so much fun.
Oh, yeah.
So much stuff is happening. And as the movie goes on, Gilliam actually gave a really good analogy for it. It's you're starting to take the not fun drugs, so it's not an enjoyable experience anymore. By the end, you realize these two people who seem charming and wacky at the beginning are actually violent and mean and can be a threat. And that movie is exactly Terry Gilliam's career, where the beginning is fantastical and wild and crazy, and then you realize, like, oh man, like, this is not fun anymore. It's still doing the same things, but it's not being presented in a way that I have anything to grasp onto.
Do you want to talk about his brand new movie, The Man Who Killed Don Quixote?
Yeah, we have to. And
it's why we're doing the podcast this week.
This is a film that, were you excited for The Man Who Killed Don Quixote?
Well, I saw Lost in La Mancha in a theater.
The documentary that catalogs the disintegration of the first, not the first, I think it was the second or third production of Gilliam's Don Quixote after it had started shooting.
And this documentary, which I think came out in 2002, 2003, is one of those, like, things that's very central to the myth of Terry Gilliam, where he's a director who has been plagued by bad luck. When he first tried to shoot this movie with Johnny Depp and Jean Rochefort, it collapsed after 6 days because there were floods, there were airplanes going overhead. Jean Rochefort had a hernia or something?
Yeah, he had like an infection, a prostate infection, I believe, and he couldn't ride a horse, which was very important for the film.
And, Gilliam, in every interview he ever gave after that, was like, we're going to make this movie, actors would come and go. Robert Duvall was going to do it. Michael Palin was going to do it. John Hurt.
But it just never happened. And I actually rewatched a documentary this week, and watching it this time, I was like, Gilliam just doesn't want to budge. And I think that's what is important about his character, is that he will not compromise on his vision. Now, he will say differently. He'll say, like, listen, my job as a director is to figure stuff out and to figure out how to do this impossible on screen. But then it's also documented over and over again in something like the 12 Monkeys documentary, The Hamster Factor, the fact that, like, a scene was taking forever because Gilliam wanted that hamster to turn in the wheel in the background. And because he couldn't get that, the scene just dragged on and on and on. And watching The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, I was like, it sucks that your main actor can't do what you want him to do. And it's tight, and the funding is tied to it, but could you find somebody else? Like, if you want to make this film, get out there, get an actor real quick, like, I don't know, put somebody in makeup, something, and do it. But, like, he wouldn't budge on that. Then I thought, I don't want to be an armchair quarterback. Like, I don't know the experience he's going through, how difficult it is. And then I was like, wait a minute. I made a movie and an actor injured themselves and couldn't continue a feature film. And I figured it out. We cast somebody else. Like, we just had to keep moving forward.
Money was tight.
Money was super tight. And he has his vision that he wants to follow. And, he wasn't able to make that version of Don Quixote, but he promised that he would. And he eventually did, with Adam Driver and Jonathan Pryce, who I think is a great pick for Don Quixote. Mm-hmm. He, looks like him at this point. He can act kind of grand and big.
Great actor.
And also look really weak. And I like Adam Driver because he brings a kind of, realness to his roles in these big fantastical things, because that's just his character. And then the movie comes out, and it's exactly what I expected.
Well, we saw the trailer a few months ago, and nothing about it encouraged me.
No.
And we watched it this week because it's having a strange release. I don't think it did that well in Europe, so it only got a one night only.
Yeah, one night only. I think it played maybe 2 nights in Canada, but that was pretty much it.
And it's kind of a catalog of all the things I don't like about Terry Gilliam anymore.
I agree.
So the plot is Adam Driver plays this hack commercial director, directing commercials, that is. And he's off somewhere in Spain creating a commercial that involves Don Quixote. And then he is reminded that Don Quixote was actually his student film when he was younger and more ambitious, which he also shot in Spain. So he goes to the town where he shot it. He encounters some of the people who he worked with, whose lives have gone, not so well. And then he finds the old man who he cast as Don Quixote, who is now living his life as if he were Don Quixote.
Oh, so that means we'll go into fantastical sequences where this heroic character can, fight giants and stuff like that, right?
I don't think they have the budget for that, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
And, the whole movie is shot... I mean, it is such an eyesore.
It is ugly looking.
Hurts to look at.
And it's also of miserable experiences. Every character is so hateful. Even Don Quixote, played by Jonathan Pryce, who's giving it his all, is such a miserable person. And I don't know if Gilliam understands that, the audience will kind of react this way to Quixote. I don't know if he's too involved in what's going on. Instead of having this kind of Quixote is this heroic figure who wants to go do this amazing stuff, and this guy who's like, no, this is not real, you're crazy. You get this hateful person who's running around and a guy who's also hateful, who are just butting heads the entire time.
Right. I mean, he's basically reprising the drama of The Fisher King, where it's this crazy guy and this other guy who feels guilt and responsibility for what happened.
Robin Williams is charming in The Fisher King for all the mugging and craziness, and who has a sympathetic backstory that the audience can care about.
Well, also, The Fisher King will sometimes, slow down and just, let you sit with it a little bit. There's the scene in Central Park in The Fisher King, for instance, where they're lying there and Robin Williams is talking about his story, where it's it's not assaulting you with absurd camera angles and fractured editing. There's no relief in Quixote, though. There's no time to get a feel for this relationship. And Adam Driver and Jonathan Pryce are just directed to flail for the whole movie.
The entire film.
Loud, loud, loud.
With screaming nothing. And when you don't have those fantastical elements to kind of make the medicine go down. And Gilliam has said that Brazil, he considers it an assault, an unpleasant experience. But it's just different in Don Quixote.
Well, I mean, I knew we were in trouble really early on, where there's that scene when Adam Driver and his crew are for dinner at this restaurant, and it's shot with this widescreen fisheye lens with just so many bodies in the frame, and it's disorienting. It's like, who should I be looking at right now? Like, how am I supposed to follow this? You never get a feel for Adam Driver as a character or why you should like him.
And, the where should I look at is an advantage in Brazil because there's so much stuff to look at. And here it's just like, I don't know which person. Yeah, what body.
And also, like, Terry Gilliam's a bit of a man out of time, I would say.
Yes. This is a film that, more than any of the other ones that I watched, I was like, oh no, Grandpa, come on.
Well, we all remember last year when he was making those comments about the Me Too movement and about, I wish I was a black lesbian and all that stuff.
He's saying that stuff on the commentary for Tideland as well.
Oy. Well, The Man Who Killed Don Quixote is, I think, quite a sexist film.
Yes, it's also a racist film.
It's got racist jokes, too. And, it makes me, like, kind of look back at the older ones and think, okay, this is a blind spot for Terry. Like, The Man Who Killed Don Quixote has a straight up, like, virgin horror complex with, the two female characters. There's
but it's based on the original material, Will.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That doesn't mean that you need to kind of regurgitate it wholesale in this film that is a complete reinvention
I mean, Gilliam believes in it, so...
Yeah. And it's also a film that, like, it kind of espouses this idea that you'll hear Gilliam say over and over in interviews now, which is like, PC culture. Nobody wants to be offended anymore. Yeah. And it's such like a misunderstanding. You hear this kind of rhetoric from a lot of people who were, I don't know, more popular back in the day and now feel that society's keeping them down.
Yeah, because they're dreamers.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you're white. Like, you've never had any problems in your life because of that.
Gilliam's had plenty of chances.
Yeah, yes.
And, the movie keeps gesturing towards something, like, potentially interesting, like with what responsibility does this headstrong artist have to the people who he works with, like there are some questions. The fact that so many of the people who worked on Adam Driver's student film, their lives have crumbled.
Related to him because he put these ideas in their head.
And, we hear the stories from the production of The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. Sarah Polley, Eric Idle, others who worked on that talk about how unsafe it was. And you can almost see Gilliam, like, going in this direction of interrogating some of these ideas about, like, the great artist and making people suffer for your art, but he doesn't go there.
The movie ends in a way that pays off the title, but it doesn't, it has no emotional weight. It doesn't mean anything. I don't know if it does for Terry Gilliam, if he sees it in a different way, but, like, it wraps up in a way where you're like, okay, I guess.
I wish he made it in the 90s.
Yeah, I wish
it would have looked good at least.
I wish he had made it, yeah. When he was doing the Johnny Depp version, there was all these kind of like fantastical sequences where Don Quixote would fight like giant puppet marionettes that they built and all this, crazy kind of stuff. But here it just feels like Gilliam, he just needs to get it out. Even though it's a story he told before in The Fisher King and The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, it's not a story he needs to tell.
Why did he spend 25 years trying to make this? It's just the same ideas that he's done every other time.
I don't know. But what I do know is that we do have Brazil. I have The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. Time Bandits, Jabberwocky.
Monty Python.
Like, it's all still there, right? You can't always do the same stuff. You get old, Will. Yeah. You can't relive your glory days.
Looks like Don Quixote got beaten by that windmill.
Yep. Rest in peace, Don Quixote. So, as per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. This week on our Patreon, as I mentioned before, we're talking about Monty Python's Holy Grail, a film that me and Will hadn't watched for a decade for obvious reasons.
Dennis, there's some lovely filth down here.
So, to listen to us talk about it, and of course we go long as we share all our favorite jokes. No, we actually try to have some insightful things to say. You can listen to us by $5 a month, become a Patreon subscriber, and that's at patreon.com/theimportantcinemaclub. And just a reminder to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate it. And to follow us on Twitter at IMPRT Cinema Club. And you can follow me at DeCloux, DECLOUX, the letter J, and Will at...
I'm at Will Sloan, Esquire, ESQ.
And we're also on Facebook. It's just a group called The Important Cinema Club. I haven't plugged it in it feels like a year, and I should actually try to do that kind of stuff every week, because the more people that like see when we post new episodes, or, we have like a weekly movie club sometimes, the more people can participate, and that's better for everybody, especially us. I should also let people know, if you don't have Apple Podcasts, but you have a phone, I would recommend just getting a podcatcher, and you can just search, like I use Podcast Addict on my Android phone, and you can just search Important Cinema Club, and it'll update it just regularly, just to let you know when a new episode comes. We're trying to stay to a more regular schedule, but sometimes a few days go by, and people forget. Like, when I started listening to podcasts, I would just check every day that it was posted.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you just forget, and you stop listening. So
I'm sorry, we have day jobs.
Yeah. All right. So next week, we need to do our due diligence as loyal and respectful Catholic members, right, Will?
We are apostles of cinema.
Yeah.
And so with Easter coming up next weekend, and I just realized that this will probably be after Easter.
It will. It will be a few days after Easter.
So, get all high on holy water and come back to us, because we are going to be talking about Jesus on film.
Do you celebrate Easter, Will?
Yeah, I go home and see my parents.
Yeah. Not me. Nope. It is not a holiday that I care very much about, unless it means finding chocolate in your home.
It's a good supplement to Christmas, I think.
That's right.
It's a little bit of a way station while you're waiting for Christmas.
If you don't get any presents on Easter...
I would get some presents, you know.
What, you do? Really?
Yeah.
I've never heard of that.
Not extravagant, but yeah.
But you get presents.
Yeah.
I've never heard of anybody getting presents on Easter. Huh. That's something new. I guess my mom isn't a good Catholic.
I guess we just did it right.
Yeah, you did do it right.
What the hell's the point of having a holiday if there's no present?
I mean, I would get chocolate, but...
I eat chocolate too, of course. That's a given.
You get presents and chocolate?
Yeah.
Wow.
Not a lot of presents. I would usually get like one or two.
Okay. All right. So our discussion of our personal lives and the way that we've been taught religion as we grow up, I'm sure will come up in the episode where we talk about Pasolini's The Gospel of St. Matthew.
Mm-hmm. And also The Greatest Story Ever Told.
Mm-hmm. And will we perhaps do a certain Last Temptation on Patreon? Maybe. You'll have to listen to find out.
Interesting.
And the reason that we're doing those two movies is I'm actually interested in the way that, Jesus, a religious figure, is portrayed in kind of grittier art house cinema and like the big Hollywood, your grandparents would go see the movie even though they haven't seen a film in like 10 years in the cinema because it's a religious one.
Yeah, they do seem like the two extremes of the Jesus canon.
So until then, my name's Justin Clue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening. All right, now we're down to what's really important. Who's your favorite Python, Will?
Oh, man. So they're all great. There are no losers in this category, but I think that while John Cleese has had higher highs, he had Fawlty Towers and he had A Fish Called Wanda, and I think that at his best, there's nobody funnier than John Cleese. But I think Michael Palin wins on points.
Really? What do you mean by points?
He's got a good filmography, including A Private Function, Brazil, Fish Called Wanda, all the way up to Death of Stalin. It's not a huge filmography.
Oh, he's so funny in Death of Stalin.
It's a solid one. He's very funny, and he's amazing in A Fish Called Wanda.
Yeah, he is.
But also, he's done so many different kinds of things. He's done the travel shows. And he's also the guy who you want to be your friend.
Yeah, well, he's a friendly one, right?
Yeah.
John Cleese, you can definitely tell he's the thornier one. That would be difficult to work with.
And I also think, John Cleese has to bear some responsibility for the fact that, given what a comic genius he has a terrible filmography.
Oh my God, his filmography is terrible. He is the definition of selling out.
Oh my God. And, he doesn't have that many movies where he stars, okay? There's Clockwise, there's Privates on Parade, Fierce Creatures. These are not classics.
No.
So A Fish Called Wanda is the one, copper bottom classic film that he stars in. And then after that, it's after A Fish Called Wanda, it was okay, that's it for a lifetime. Just gonna do cameos from now on.
Do you need a British actor to appear in your film that's a John Cleese type?
Sure.
Upper crust, kind of snooty? Then I'm the man for you. What, you want me to be the new Q and James Bond? Sure, whatever, I'll be that guy.
Nearly Headless Nick in the first two Harry Potter films.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
That was a character that kind of disappeared.
He was all over Shrek.
Yes, but there are also so many bad comedies around the turn of the millennium he was in, The Out of Towners, where he also played a hotel owner. And there was Rat Race, of course. I mean, Rat Race is probably one of his better movies, which is a fucking shame.
What, you mean our generation's It's a Mad, 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 Mad World?
That film.
Did you see Rat Race in theaters?
Yes.
Did you like it?
Yeah, sure.
I remember it was one of those films that I left and I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. I went to the movies and it was a big deal, but was it funny?
Well, that's a good question, because there's a lot happening in it.
Has Jim Abrahams let me down?
Like, are there any good jokes in it? That's the paradox.
There is.
The Hitler
joke
car, yeah.
was John
Lovitz.
That's very funny. And Mr. Bean, very disappointing in the film.
Well, yeah, he just plays Mr. Bean except as an Italian.
Yes. But anytime it cuts to John Cleese doing his shtick, making bets, it's pretty funny.
I saw Charlie's Angels Full Throttle again recently.
Yeah.
I like to revisit the classics.
Yeah. You want to see if McG will be the vulgar auteur you want him to be.
Yeah, I'm trying to turn him into like our Frank Tashlin or something like that, you know?
And what is John Cleese? Great in it?
Yeah, oh yeah. John Cleese is one of many stars in it. He plays Lucy Liu's father.
I do not remember Full Throttle.
And there's a comic subplot where there's a mistake where he thinks that the three angels are in a gay relationship together, like a poly relationship. And so, they'll come in and they'll be like after some big action scene, and they're like, oh, whoa, boy, it sure was and there'll be a lot of double entendres where it's misinterpreted, and Cleese is just like going, whoa.
I mean, that's usually all that's demanded of him. You know what? I'm looking at his filmography here. He starred in a lot, or appeared in a lot less films than I thought he did. I mean, he had his George of the Jungle.
Who could forget? Yeah.
Around the World in 80 Days.
In the early 90s, he's not in much. He's in Kenneth Branagh's Frankenstein.
It looks like he's in Pink Panther 2, but not Pink Panther 1.
Yes, he played the Herbert Lom character, the inspector. Pink Panther 1 had Kevin Kline in that role.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
Do you think John Cleese is a step down or a step up from Kevin Kline?
Oh, at this point, probably a step down.
Yeah, probably.
Sorry to say.
I mean, Kevin Kline is a weird actor that he actually doesn't do much if you look at his filmography. Yeah. I remember someone saying that his nickname is Kevin D. Kline.
Which is too bad, because he also doesn't have that great a filmography.
No, he doesn't have a very good filmography either.